So this is part 2 of my discussion with Veterinarian Roger Meacock, where we discussed some of these testing that DEFRA will use. Look, we know government policies are anti-small farmers. That's one thing I've learned from all of my discussions with small farmers in this series. And so one tool of state that they could use are certain tests whereby they could deem your herd infected, and those tests, as Roger will explain, and has gone more than explained, he's published a peer-reviewed paper on the subject, and I'll let Roger just explain about these tests. And he also goes on to mention and talks about Bovaer, the feed additive for cattle. So this comes off the back of, I thought it was a good time to publish this second part, bearing in mind the discussion I've just had with David Bennion, where he proved that DEFRA were fabricating test results so that he couldn't sell his raw milk. And then they also fabricated a criminal record against him, and when he went to court, they came in and destroyed his water supply for his cattle. So some very underhand tactics, and when the state resort to those underhand tactics, why would you rely on the state's testing procedures for the future of your herd when your livelihood depends on it? So this hopefully will give farmers a temporary solution. I'm not saying it's the solution. I think the solution lays in with untying yourself from government control. But anyway, here's a discussion with Roger.
Okay, so a PCR test, what it does is you take a sample of something, and it's looking for what they call primers, so lengths of nucleic acids, which are the building blocks of DNA and RNA. And so what it does is when the primer locks, it will then replicate. There'll be a polymerase enzyme that replicates that. And every time you cycle that process, you double the material that's there. So right. 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16.
So it's not the fact that the material itself within the subject doubles, it's the fact you're cycling the process doubles.
Yes.
It.
Yeah.
Right. So just in my that doesn't sound right to me.
No. So as you said, because it goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 16,
yeah, 32. You can make it. You can stop. Where do you want the? I could, if I was paying you, for instance, I could say, Roger, I'd like that process to read there, and you process it. Is that am I right? Is that basically along the lines?
Well, the more you double it, the more material it looks like, as you say, it looks like it was there, but it wasn't, because it was still the same original amount. Yeah. But it looks like there was more because you keep on doubling it. And so there was a paper done where they showed that if you do more than 23 cycles of the test, it meant that the original sample wasn't sufficiently present to be infectious, and yet were cycling the PCR test 40 plus times.
Right.
And
so by its own means it's invalidated, is it?
Yeah, and then without knowing how many cycles have been done.
I see. You don't know.
You don't know. And obviously there's a point at which you say, okay, I've done these many cycles, now I'm going to try and read it. So if they don't read it after every cycle, they can't see at what case it started to kick in.
Like you say, without knowing how many cycles you've done, you don't know where you are on the chart. If you've done one cycle of 40, we'll have a drastic. And if you don't know that number, how can you have a fair result or an accurate result? And
it also, obviously, all the PCR test tells you is that it's found the original sequence that it was looking for. It won't tell you whether it came from a complete organism, whether it came from one that had been already dealt with by the immune system and had already been broken up to a certain degree, or whether it was a mutation of something completely different, or a completely different organism that has that sequence within its DNA. And given that you've only got A, C, G and T as the possible nucleotide bases, and you're only looking for something like 18 to 20 letters,
Yeah.
what's the chance, given that there's literally billions of those?
It's almost impossible not to find the result you want.
There's a good chance that multiple organisms will have that sequence somewhere in their genetic material, whether it's the host, so the animal that actually is testing itself, because obviously when you take a swab from a cow or a chicken, you're going to have cow and chicken cells in there, as well as whatever bacteria, fungi and viruses and whatever else is likely to be there, and also probably contaminants from the environment and birds and wherever else. Obviously, if a cow sticks its nose in a trough and a badger or a wild bird has stuck its beak in there, trying to
you're going to get all kinds of
you're going to get
results.
all sorts of contamination.
So this is correct me if I'm wrong, but run on the basis of these PCR tests, the things we're describing now. So we've described in part one the policies and various things that are affecting farmers, and how I think your words were the farming industry is under attack from the government, which is what I feel as well, as it happens. And so now, if I want to wipe out an industry, and I've got this, I'm going to call it a tool, that's called a PCR.
Yeah.
What an amazing tool that is, to be able to say, yeah, this farm's got this on it. And you with that tool, I can deem a farm contaminated, or whatever I would like it, and to the level as well that I'd like it to be. I'm in total control of that farm's destiny by this very questionable test.
The test itself is very accurate. It's the interpretation, is where you set your interpretation that's the problem. And as you say, if you had an ulterior motive, you can set your interpretation to be what you think is what you deem to be a critical level, when actually it's not a critical level. So PCR testing on its own should never be used on its own for that basis. So there should always, if PCR testing is going to be used, it should always be used in conjunction with other tests to confirm or deny that what you're looking for is
as
there.
As part of a range of tools rather than the tool.
Exactly. So I would hope that DEFRA would be doing some sort of cell culture isolation, or some sort of other, but even antibody tests aren't completely reliable, because just because you've got an antibody to something, it means you might have come across something that's generated that antibody a long time in the past.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be current.
Yes.
Depending on what the level of the antibody is, obviously, but it's.
But with a PCR test, you could amplify that antibody that's historic.
Well, the antibody test is done slightly differently.
Right. Okay.
But it is a slightly different test. But you can still get false positives and false negatives within that testing as well. So whatever testing is going to be used, whether it's just PCR or whether it's PCR and other tests, then what you need to know is what is the level of false positives for all the different tests.
Yeah.
And if you find, if you swab 100 cows, but you only find it in one cow, how significant is that? What is the chances, especially if it's asymptomatic? There's nothing clinically going on. Yeah. There's a high probability that that's a false positive.
Yeah.
And so this is where we've got to sort of get some common sense into there, and you look at some of the.
Sorry to interrupt, Roger, but my thing, you're rightly, obviously, you're trying to look at it from a scientific point of view, because you're saying, how can we get some common sense into this? But if I'm a government and I've got nefarious aims for your farm, we know that the farmers are under attack. We know the policies don't include farmers, and we know other big organisations are in that farmland.
Yes.
I understand you approaching it from a common sense point of view to try and tackle the government, but the government aren't interested in your common sense.
No.
They're interested in the farmland, getting the farmers out of the way, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I'd love to be able to help the farmers and to say, what about a defence?
Yeah.
What about a defensive strategy for that? And maybe that's where your white paper can come in, because you've questioned the science on that PCR test, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, if there's any farmers out there who've got high-level law degrees or know somebody or got, maybe got a son or a daughter who is actually a highly powered barrister or lawyer who can say, okay, well, now we've got something to hang our hat on. We can try and put some sort of injunction or get something in place so that we can start being preemptive on some of this. Then let's have a discussion. Let's have a chat at that level and see what can be done and what a realistic defence, practical pathway would be for farmers in that situation, because I think
you've given them the first block in that argument, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've given them a very, very useful tool, as far as I can see, in their armoury to at least make a defence, because I can't see a defence until I can't.
No.
There are little legal arguments you make, but with the weight of the state coming after your herd or your farm, you're going to need a robust argument, and at least you've given in the first.
Yeah,
counter argument to
and
that.
The fact that the paper has actually been published in the Journal of Independent Medicine means that it's been peer reviewed. So it's not my, okay, I'm the only author of the paper.
Yeah.
It's not my opinion. It's actually been verified by other scientists who do peer review process, and it's been published. So
that carries some weight.
So it carries more weight than just my opinion. It's not just me saying it or anybody, and it can't now be dismissed as conspiracy theory because it has been published in a medical journal.
That could be a really key aspect, I feel, at the very least, in ordinary farmers that might be watching this, when they get DEFRA or letters from DEFRA or whoever it might be, if they're at the gate, they can have your peer-reviewed paper on PCR tests and start to question, and maybe even cause that period of cooling off so that they can put forward an argument.
Yeah, I think even if it just buys time.
Yeah.
So that you've got a chance then to say, okay, if we do find someone who's a lawyer we can actually say, look, and they say, right, if you give us 24 hours notice, we can get an injunction the following day.
Yes. These things are important.
If we can buy, even if it only buys time to delay the testing for a few days, it might give time and room to put some other measures and things in place to try and stop it all, and at least brings some rationale into. Obviously, if there is some highly dangerous pathogen out there, unlikely but possible, then obviously we don't want to stand in the way of doing the right thing either, but we want to do the right thing. We want to make sure that it's got reasonable grounds for being what it is, and we also know that under health policy they are already saying, part of the international health regulations amendments that treaty there, there are provisions to potentially call for governments to implement veterinary measures if they think that the animals or an animal, a species or multiple species, are the reservoir infection for something that's affecting people. So This is where we've got to be ready and see what the angles and see the writing on the wall for what it potentially is. So it isn't just coming from within the UK.
That makes a lot of sense.
We've got potential for it to come in via who we know has got one of his biggest funders, bigger than a lot of the countries, is Bill Gates, who's boasted about how much he give him as a return on investment, and obviously he's invested, as you say, in buying up farmland and invested hugely in plant-based food technologies, which we know aren't fundamentally healthy.
It's not even very hard to join the dots.
It's not, exactly. I mean, and he's quite good at telling us what he's invested in as well.
Yeah.
It's, it's all there, as you say. The dots join up very easily, and when you realise, he's made his billions on Microsoft, he didn't need to make any more. The fact that he is trying to make more, and he's still excited by getting a 20 to 1 return on investment. You can see that hasn't lost his drive for money, and so if he thinks he can, he can manipulate markets to make some of his other investments give similar or better returns, he's obviously not averse to doing that. So I think we've got to just realise that these people are, and they don't care what doesn't affect them directly. They really don't care what the impact for anybody else, including the farmers and the vets who are supposed to be working on the farms. If many vets out there are watching this and you're in farm practice, what do you think you're going to do as a job when there's no livestock left?
Have to diversify.
This is something you're going to have to think about. Because I chose to be a farm vet because I like the lifestyle of being out on the road and being on a farm and feeling like I was part of the business, and I actually had more meaning than just tending cats and dogs, which are, much as I love them, obviously got Motley, who's got a couple of guest appearances in, but at the end of the day, they haven't got the same economic impact. It's not part of a sort of business in quite the same way that you're feeling like you're providing worth with your work to. So I'm sure a lot of the vets who have gone into the farm side love that. They love their job because they feel that they're actually got worth. They're contributing to society through better food production and animal health, obviously, as well. But it is part of that. You're part of that farmer's business. All my farmers that I saw as clients were also my friends. And so you much because you saw them on a much more of a frequent basis, you were that much more involved with them. So I'd say to any vets watching, what do you envisage doing if there's no livestock? And we know that this is part of the aim. So the time to stand up and call things out and say, actually, this isn't making sense. Why are we supporting all of these things? It is now.
I couldn't agree more. Time's against us. I think it's time for action.
It is. There's everybody's got to grow a pair.
And on a slightly different note, but you've been into the government and various agencies over Bovaer.
Bovaer.
That's a cattle feed supplement, and it blew up over social media. Arla, I think, introduced it into their dairies. Can you tell us a bit about Bovaer and why that is not a very good thing?
Well, Bovaer is a feed additive. It was actually self-certified effectively by the manufacturer, because I contacted the Veterinary Medicines Directive and said, hang on a minute, why have you allowed this? Why have you authorised this? And they came back to me and said, we haven't authorised it because it's a food additive. The Food Standards Agency and Food Standards Scotland have effectively passed it. So I said, okay. So, but it affects animal physiology, which is the definition of a veterinary medicines pharmaceutical product, and the FDA in the States categorised it as a veterinary medicine, although they changed how they dealt with it thereafter, but they still categorised it as a veterinary medicine. So it's like, well, so why aren't you involved? And they basically said, well, because, and the Food Standards Agency, they handed it over to them, and they came back to me and said, well, basically the manufacturer chose for it to be certified as a food additive, so we agreed. So they chose how they wanted it to come to market. And they only did it.
That's the tail wagging the dog.
Well, exactly. But even so, the Veterinary Medicines Directive should have stepped in and go, well, we've done an assessment. I've actually had an email from the Chief Veterinary Officer, and she has admitted that there's been no health and safety welfare assessment done for Bovaer on the cattle themselves. That work has not been done. And some of the information I've had back via a Danish journalist who's in contact with some Danish farmers where it is mandated in Denmark, is that, you know, some cows have been getting fever, diarrhea, food drop, inappetence, and some cows have actually died, and mastitis. So basically, when you've got a cow that's already being pushed hard like the dairy cows are, they're already on a metabolic knife edge. Once you stop reducing food intake, then the energy's down. So something, you know, because they're being pushed so much into production, the immune system or something else will then take the hit, and then they become susceptible to other things. So it's an indirect and a direct effect, and some of the research that was done was only done on literally a handful. Some of it was done on rats, and then there was some studies done on cows, but I think it was only about 5 of them in the trial, and for only 15 weeks for something which is going to be fed for a whole lactation on lactation.
Given what we spoke about before about government policies and the attack on farming, what do you see as their angle on this? Do you know what I mean? What do you see?
I think it was fast tracked purely because of climate, because of the methane angle. But again, you know, the levels of methane in the environment naturally is something like 1900 parts per billion. So it's 0.00019.
I honestly struggle to believe that this cow methane, let's say, I find it so ridiculous.
It is.
But there's been a feed developed off the back of this notion.
Again, and Bill Gates has you know, been investing into, whether it's Bovaer directly or similar. You know, he's got his finger in that pie as well. So we know that there's this agenda. So they've basically fast tracked an approval for a substance that's not been adequately tested, and certainly not for the length of time that bears any correspondence to the time that it would be used on farm. And as I pointed out in my last correspondence with them, the evidence that I've had back from Denmark indirectly has been on more cows, when it's been used on more cows than were used in their trials. So the evidence I'm providing them you could argue it's anecdotal, but it is less anecdotal than theirs, because the trials that were supposedly scientifically done weren't with sufficient animals to be statistically significant anyway. So you still can't say that there's anything more than anecdotal from what they're basing it on.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've got more evidence on my side than they've got on theirs. But you know, they're obviously, as you say, there will be a top-down edict and decree coming down saying anything to do with climate we fast track. And we know again that climate was chosen by the Club of Rome, who are a think tank for the United Nations, and it's in their own Club of Rome document saying we choose climate change as a vehicle behind which to unite people under an existential threat to accept loss of freedoms and rights that they wouldn't otherwise accept.
Exactly, you can see it being wheeled out.
It's in black and white. You know, said it. It's not my words. It's their words, and that's. So we know we've got this. So we've got a twofold problem. We've obviously got climate, and then we've got this other agenda with to push frankenfood. Again, all driven by money, because again, climate is being used from the farmer's point of view. You know, they're the companies that want to put up the solar farms, they're getting huge grants, and that's where they make their money. And we also know that, you know, when it comes to the point where a solar farm time is life, you know, it's obviously got a lifespan. When that comes up, farmers are going to be in a position where they either have to replace the older technology with new solar panels, or revert to something else. And I know I was talking to Mark Byford, and he was saying to me that it costs £1 million per acre to clean the land up. So those farmers are thinking they're making a fortune by using their land as solar farms. If you're that company that you think has got the responsibility to do that work, don't be surprised when they go bankrupt, leaving you holding it, and it's your land, you're responsible.
That's an interesting way to get farmers' land through the back door through bankruptcy, isn't it?
Well, it is.
I would suggest.
Or seize it because it's not
It's contaminated,
it's contaminated land.
Yeah, very
and then they can buy it up at the penny in the pound and flip it.
That's an argument I haven't heard before. I hadn't heard that. So that's I didn't know about that. That could be well worth digging around a bit deeper.
I think we've just got to assume when money is driving something to the degree it is, because we know climate is there's no issue, there is no emergency. So when money is the driver of the whole climate issue, any company that's making money isn't going to take on their liability if it's going to bank, if they can make more money by closing their company, even if they start up another one, and go again, they without
be careful who you have to getting these payouts from, because there could be a sting in the tail. For
exactly. Yeah, you know, it's be careful. Yeah.
Going back to Bovaer.
Yeah.
I think I've heard you say that even organic cattle will have to be fed it by 2030. Am I right in saying that?
They've threatened that. I don't know how much they will try and force that through, but I've heard that.
It would seem logical, wouldn't it? Because if everyone all of a sudden said all our cattle's organic, well, they're not going to let that fly, are they? I wouldn't imagine. And
at the moment, it's only lactating dairy cows. But so you can imagine at some point in the future that'll widen that to be dry cows and heifers, and then beef cows as well, beef cattle as well.
Interesting.
But there's a question mark. You know, the research had a question mark over the genotoxicity, so how much it might damage the genes, the DNA. But also you know, carcinogenicity. There was a question mark over that as well, and it reduced fertility. So that, you know, when farming relies on fertility
and healthy livestock,
and healthy livestock, our food, our health relies on whether our food is healthy.
Yeah.
To the point where I'd encourage as many farmers to go regenerative farming as you possibly can, because that's the most healthy food, nutrient dense food that you can produce. But the trouble is, they're under so much pressure from the supermarkets to produce food so cheaply that they've been forced and pressured into implementing practices which aren't necessarily in the animal's best welfare. I mean, I remember when I first went into being a farm vet, if a herd had an average lactation yield of sort of 7,000 or 8,000, it was doing pretty well. Anything sort of around the 10,000 litre mark was pretty exceptional.
Yeah.
And yet now 10,000 is the average, and you know, and cows now they're only averaging something like 4 lactations, or not even that. I think it's less than that.
Yeah.
Sort of 3 point something lactations per cow, whereas so it means that most cows aren't going to live beyond 6. Well, their natural life is 20 years, and when I was farming, there were cows that were regularly on their 10th lactation. So you know, we've improved productivity, but we haven't actually improved on one level. On an individual level, we can say, yes, there's less mastitis, there's less lameness, all the rest of it maybe, but actually we've pushed the cows so hard, they're on such a metabolic knife edge that their lifespan now is significantly shorter. And you could argue actually that cows only produce a certain number of litrage in their lifetime, and we either take it in a large amount in a short time.
With their eggs. Yeah, so the real intense ones don't live as long, and the one. Yeah.
So I think, you know, we need to, you know, and because farmers care for their animals, and because the public care for their animals, and because our food is so reliant on how it's produced as to how healthy it is for us, you know, we need to get back to more regenerative farming, which again, by supplying the food direct to the local public, will increase the margin to allow farms to take the pressure off their animals, which will reduce their vet bills, reduce their feed bills. It will, you know, help welfare all
to me,
round.
that's the answer. To me, that I've heard throughout our discussion today, the answer that's screaming out to me is farming practice is going to have to change, or you're going to be wiped out by the government.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to change. That's on the table. Change or be wiped out.
Yeah.
So as far as I can see, the only option really now is to get that relationship with the public going again, with your own communities.
Absolutely.
Be the heart of the community again, and supply the food, and because, as you say, these unhealthy animals leads to unhealthy us.
Yeah.
And Bovaer, just to finish off on Bovaer, I think I've heard you say that some of the ingredients on there are you'd have to wear PPE with.
Yeah, the NOP, which is the active ingredient in, I think not nitrooxypentane, or so, I can't remember what it is, but it's propanol. It's something like that. But NOP is the abbreviation for it, and it's in its own safety data. It advises people handling it to have full.
Because of
full
skin
PPE,
issues, ocular issues, respiratory, and that's going into cattle feed.
Yeah, and of course the dust, even if it's pelleted, the dust from the pellets is still going to be in the trough, and of course they're going to shove their noses in it because they've got to, because basic anatomy, mouth is below your nose, so you can't but not be breathing in the dust and the dust going in the eyes. So if it's irritant in its pure form, it's going to be irritant, obviously in an acute situation, but over time. Doses often amount over time. So having a large amount in your eye straight away, it's going to be very irritant to begin with. But having a small amount in your eye over a much longer period of time is also going to take its wear and create irritation and put a strain on the eye to look after itself as well. So it's it's just common sense.
Yeah, it seems crazy to me. It just seems absolutely madness that this stuff would be in the feed, and we're feeding cows with it, and it's not the way the public wanted it. Well, clearly the outrage for Arla was huge.
Yeah,
the public don't want it. It's only these NGOs and these other outside forces that are trying to bring it into our food supply. Which, again, if we don't act now, if we don't support these farmers and put our money where our mouth is, and stay out of the supermarkets who are actively bringing in all these things against the farmers, against our own health, then...
But it's more than that, Clive, because what they're doing is by putting something in the cattle feed that they know the consumer doesn't want, because the consumer response was to boycott Arla, if you want to get rid of cattle farming and livestock farming, you make it so the consumer doesn't want to buy the product.
There you go.
And then when there's no demand for the product, then the food demand has got to go elsewhere, which becomes the frankenfood. So, this is how farmers have got to recognise it. So those farmers who are feeding Bovaer, whether voluntary at the moment, have got to think, if you're feeding a product which is making your food undesirable to the public, then is that actually doing farming on the whole a good turn? And the answer, I'm afraid, is no.
Yeah.
And you might be getting a premium for your milk or whatever for the time being, but that's not going to last either.
No.
But and we know it's not going to last because we know there is a finite time to how much they want people to be having meat and dairy anyway. So by doing all these things, now for short-term profit, you're poisoning the well for much further on down the line, and reducing you're reducing the trust of the public in farming too, and so that's also a very important thing for the farmers who've got to keep the public on side by not doing the sorts of things that the public don't want happening with their food.
Yeah.
So this is it's common sense really.
And the public have a huge sway in this. It's where they put their money, I think. Yeah. Yeah. So as Mark Byford says, contact your local farm and ask what you can buy off of them. That would be a good start, I think. And well, thank you, Roger. It's been a fascinating chat with Roger. I hope you agree. And over 2 parts. And one of the key things for me in this discussion has been Roger's own white paper that can be used as a real tool to help farmers. You can download it from his website. I strongly suggest getting your hands on a copy. That might just save your herd, or at least buy you some time where you can get some legal assistance, because I fear that's around the corner. Yeah. So
That's certainly a possibility, yeah.
thank you, Roger. Thanks very
That's
much.
Clive, yeah, pleasure.
Brilliant.